Turning to Dick, Malin asked what subjects they already had, saying that she would be in charge of catarology in their group. Then she asked him again how many points he had gotten for Dynamics of Darkness. To which he replied that his average score was 70 and for Dynamics of Darkness 74. When she heard that and calmed down a bit, she said that it wasn't so bad for a dummy. Dick noted with a smile that she was rather picky, but not to dwell on it. He raised his hand to the top and asked her enthusiastically who was the last one they would take in their group, adding that she had only to tell him and he would find anyone. Malin simply replied that she didn't care, to which Dick asked who she would pick if she had to choose. Realizing that she had no choice, the girl, folding her arms across her chest with an indifferent face, replied that if she had to choose, she would choose someone with good hematology, as it saved time and made many calculations easier. On hearing this, Dick immediately replied that they wouldn't go anywhere, adding that he would be back soon. There was silence between Simon and Malin, who were left alone, while the rest of the students, watching them in surprise, were bewildered by such a powerful combo of the best student in the class and a boy with special clearance. The silent Simon was approached by Malin sitting next to him, asking if his name was really Simon Falentia, saying that she had never heard that name before, then asked where he lived. Turning to the girl, he replied that he was the heir to a small plot of land in the kingdom of Baldwin, where his family runs Les Hill. He then asked the girl about her family, which shocked her very much. She couldn't believe that he didn't know who she was, so she asked him if he was serious. To which he replied, not surprised by her question, that he really didn't know. Realizing that the guy really didn't know who she was, Malin introduced herself, saying that she was from a highly respected family with deep roots in Ivory Tower. Hearing the girl's answer, Simon was surprised and asked if Ivory Tower was that magic tower. The girl answered that it had been called that 300 years ago. Suddenly remembering something, Simon said that that was where Cern, who was the second student with special clearance, was from. However, his last words seemed to have hurt Malin, as she asked him to be quiet with a fake smile on her face, exuding a murderous aura. To which he, seeing her mood, replied that it was fine. Again sitting in silence, Simon pondered why the girl had such a reaction to the mention of Cerna. Still unable to understand it, he sighed, concluding that noble families were too complicated and he just didn't need to think about it yet. Suddenly Dick returned with someone behind him, apologizing for the wait, cheerfully announced that he had found them a team member who excelled in hematology. Adding that she was an excellent hematologist with an 87 grade in the subject. Then pointing to a shy girl of short stature with pink hair and small wings that moved most likely from excitement, Dick introduced her as Ursula Camabares. The girl excitedly folded her hands in front of her excitedly and a little stammering sincerely thanked the guys for letting her join the group. Then she bowed and in the same excited voice repeated that her name was Camabares Ursula, adding that they could call her just Cami and promising that she would do her best to help the group. While Malin looked at the girl with interest, Simon marveled at her wings, which he thought looked very unusual. After the girl was done with her introduction, Simon told her that she didn't need to be so formal since they were in the same class. When she heard that, Cami replied excitedly that she was only 16, but Dick smiled and reassured her that age didn't matter, because there were 20-year-olds in the class. Hearing this, the girl replied that she would be sure to remember it. The next moment, however, she was approached by Malin, who had been silent all this time, and after repeating her surname, asked if that was what she was thinking about. As it turned out, Ursula was a great vampire family. Hearing this, Dick remembered that it was indeed true, adding that now the distinguished lordship of the Ursula family should be in Kizen, but he had never heard from her in all this time. However, Malin angrily ordered him not to say so, to which he replied that he couldn't do so as he was very shocked. At the same time Cami looked at the guys confused, not knowing what to say. After that she came to her senses and said that it was all because her mom was an ordinary person. This information confused everyone, from which there was an awkward pause. When Dick came to his senses, he apologized immediately, saying he hadn't known about it, to which the girl replied that it was all right. Simon realized that she was the illegitimate daughter of a vampire family and realized why she wasn't talked about as much as he was. Dick, on the other hand, decided to apologize by talking about himself. Starting with the fact that, he was a commoner, however his father was the owner of the White Cow Trade Group. Hearing this, Cammy asked in surprise that wasn't it one of the largest trading groups. Dick went on to say that he was the third of 8 sons, so the heir was his older brother, who would get everything, but because of that he could do whatever he wanted. Cammy clenched her fists and looked at the boy confused. He added that although he was ashamed to say it, he had been sent to Kizen only because his family saw some talent for black magic in him, but he was on a mission to find out what the necromancers needed and to report on the market. A surprised Simon asked his friend if that was why he had said it was important to go to Rochester. He replied that it was, but added that it didn't mean that he did whatever his father told him to do. Then, in an enthusiastic voice, he raised his hand in the air and said that he would graduate from Kizen and start his own trading group in Rochester, so big that even his father would think differently of him. Seeing Dick's attitude, Simon exclaimed that it was cool. Cammy wished him luck, while Malin just snorted that she didn't care. Suddenly the assistant came over, surprised to note that their group was even talking to each other already. Handing them a sheet that had the number 7 written on it, which was the same as the number of Naruto's legendary team, he informed them that they should write down the names of all the members of the group, as well as the subject they planned to focus on. After the examiner left, Simon turned to Malin, who had already started to fill out the sheet, and asked her if she wanted to be the leader of their group as the best student in it, to which she contemptuously replied that she would. The next moment, however, the question of choosing a name for the group came before them. The assistant put a sheet magnetically on the board with group number 7, where the leader was Malin Willen, while the group was simply called Team Number 7. A tired Dick stretched out on his desk frustratedly, adding that he liked the name Everything Malin Does, while Cammy shyly said she wanted the team to be called Pink Bunny Girls. However, their words were suddenly interrupted by someone shouting angrily, asking his interlocutor what he should do if he had such a bad combination. Simon turned around and looked to where the sounds of quarreling were coming from. As it turned out, the blonde-haired boy and his friend were suggesting that the 2 girls team up, while one of them replied that those 2 had 2 toxicologies, which didn't suit them. Elsewhere, someone was discussing a group where 3 students with the dynamics of darkness were gathered together, which in their opinion was not a wise decision. In another place, one of the students was pointing his finger at the other, saying that this was his potential profile and that his other grades were also good, to which the other replied that he didn't care about that, adding that he was going to be a part of their group anyway. Watching all this, Simon noted with confusion that things had gotten a lot tougher. Dick, who was sitting next to him, replied that it wasn't surprising, since elemental black magic assessed all 8 subjects, and that's why all the groups wanted students with different directions for each specialization. So if one got too close to students with the same direction, one might end up not getting any other group members at all, which was how it worked out for those guys. Adding that they were very lucky in this regard. At the same time, a girl with long yellow hair pointed at the guys in front of her and mockingly said that she would only help one of their group. She shouted irritably that if they hadn't taken Lucy, there would be 4 of them in the team. The other girl, who was probably Lucy, apologized to the guys who didn't know what to do and went to the other team. As it turned out, there was a group of girls, who saw the new girl, and also with good grades in hematology, warmly greeted her. Simon, who was observing all this, once again noted that life at Kizen was pretty brutal, but Dick, who turned to him, said that they didn't have time to worry about the others. Since this always happens during student defense, so if they can't do well now, they will continue to fall behind. And falling behind in Kizen meant only one thing, and that was a ticket home. Malin on the other hand couldn't understand what was so cruel about it at all. Saying that they just didn't have enough effort, preparation, and skills, then dismissively asking what they'd been doing all the time since they'd started school. Adding that even if someone's grades were bad, they should have been attracted to the group in other ways. Simon listened to her words and thought depressedly that even though this was happening, there was nothing he could do about it. The next moment Vice-Chancellor Jane came to the middle of the class and told the students who had not yet found a group to go to the front of the class. Immediately there was whispering around the classroom that they would probably not be in Kizen next week, with some saying that they would be finished after just one question on catarology. Vice-Chancellor Jane turned to the students who had failed to form a group and asked them if they were angry. To which one of the girls nodded her head frustratedly. The vice-chancellor continued by saying that a difficult start does not mean a bad ending, adding that they should remember this and try harder in the future, and also adding that they will see hope if they try in specific subjects and not all at once. She then informed them that they could return to their seats, which they did in a downcast state. Then addressing all the students sitting in the classroom, Vice-Chancellor Jane said that since not all the groups had been formed, she would make an important announcement, then announced that next week after the end of the student defense period, they would be holding a group performance of the first class in elementary black magic, where they will have to fight one monster. The whole class froze in anticipation of her next words. And that monster will be a Cyclops, Vice-Chancellor Jane announced. Upon hearing this, the students began to talk excitedly, as they were shocked that they would have to fight the Cyclops and wondered if they could do anything at all against such a formidable opponent. Telling the rambunctious class to be quiet, Vice-Chancellor Jane said she would explain the rules. It was to begin with them going into the dungeon with their group to defeat the Cyclops together. However, only one student would personally fight the monster, while the others would have to stay behind and support the one who was fighting. The supporting students were also allowed to weaken the monster. After saying that in such a case, such skills as fatigue, shackles and blinding, as well as bleeding from hematology or poisoning from toxicology would be useful. In addition, attacks from summoned creatures were also allowed, but the direct magic of necromancers, including black magic, was not allowed. After finishing with the basic information, Vice-Chancellor Jane said that they could refer to the papers for more details. She then went on to say that the fighting member of the group would be protected by a vest with a barrier spell. The grade would depend on the success of their fight, but speed, stability, teamwork, creativity, and the degree of completion of black magic would also be taken into account. Malin, who was glowing with joy, wrote something down in her notebook. At the end, she added that in order to successfully defeat Cyclops and pass the test, they would have to improve their abilities as much as possible before the test. After listening to the teacher, Simon's face showed a firmness that he had to do his best. Having finished her explanation, Vice-Chancellor Jane asked if anyone had any questions. A hand immediately went up from the audience. A girl introducing herself as Jamie Victoria excitedly asked if they would really be fighting a real Cyclops, or if it was supposed to be the assimilation fight system that was in Kizen. She replied that they had caught live Cyclops in the east of the continent, then said that she had forgotten to mention something. She added in a grim voice that before the test, they'd have to sign a document accepting all risks, including life safety. After these words, a gloomy atmosphere prevailed in the class. The Vice-Chancellor, seeing that everyone was silent, asked if anyone had any more questions. A boy with bright yellow hair sitting in the front row raised his hand and introduced himself as Scott Schneider and asked excitedly what would happen if they could not induce the Cyclops. To which Chancellor Jane replied that they would then have a minimum grade on all grading standards. Losing would count in 3 cases. In the first case, if the fighting team member can no longer fight; in the second case, if the professor or instructor prohibits the continuation of the fight; and the third, if all members of the team surrender. Hearing Professor Jane's words, Meili with a serious and thoughtful face said that to fight a real Cyclops, they would need to develop a good strategy, while Simon, who hadn't even thought about it, enthusiastically said that it would probably be so cool that his heart was already pounding. While Cammy with a slightly worried face reported that she was a bit scared. Dick turned to the guys and asked who was going to be the fighter, to which Malin immediately replied that she was, as she was the strongest in the group. Simon with a serious expression asked his teammates, since only one person would be fighting, if this test would not be too loyal to those who excelled in magical combat. Hearing Simon's words, Cammy leaned over and said that she was thinking the same thing. Then she added that since the Cyclops blows would not be weak, it would not be easy to defend against them with black magic, and besides, it would take a lot of darkness to defend, so it would be best to just dodge the attacks. Malin replied that she was thinking the opposite. She said that students of magic combat would prefer magical attacks to physical ones, but it would hardly work on the Cyclops skin. Dick agreed with the girl's words, saying that the Cyclops skin was indeed very thick. And even if they strengthened themselves with darkness, they would quickly lose their stamina. Hearing their thoughts, Cammy turned to Malin and asked if she had a plan to defeat the Cyclops. With a wink and a satisfied smile on her face, she replied that of course she had a plan. Seeing that there were no more questions, Vice-Chancellor Jane said that there were 3 lessons of elemental dark magic left before the group performance, saying that in each lesson each group would present their battle strategy, and in the second lesson they would be able to experience virtual combat. The third lesson would be a real battle where they would have a chance to show what they were capable of. After saying that now they had time to discuss strategy, the Vice-Chancellor Jane added that they could go forward if anyone had any questions. As soon as the professor had finished giving time for discussion, Dick asked, without enthusiasm, turning to the boys what their plan was. To which Marilyn said passionately, and Em listened attentively. Then she created a magic circle in the palm of her hand, which shone with a bright golden color. And saying that it was elemental darkness magic. She looked at the circle with an enthusiastic smile and said the words, "Flash of darkness," and released a fiery flame from the circle, which flashed with a bright light. Then she asked proudly, wouldn't something like that help them? Dick was shocked to see it, and asked if she'd already learned the spell. Simon shouted in delight that it was amazing. When she had dispelled the flames, she said with a satisfied smile on her face that she was going to tell them her plan, and they agreed. Drawing a simple diagram in a notebook, Marilyn explained that she would first fight the Cyclops using a flash of darkness, while they would support her by sending curses at the enemy. Finishing with the fact that they would have to use fatigue curses on the Cyclops to slow it down, while she would burn it to the ground. Interrupting the girl's explanation, Dick said in an indignant voice that she had forgotten that teamwork was also important to the grade. Even though she would be able to prove herself, the others would remain empty and would not get any points for teamwork. When Marilyn heard this, she turned and asked in a contemptuous voice what he was proposing. But Simon answered for Dick, asking the girl if she could create a flash of darkness while dodging a Cyclops attack. She answered that she could, and asked him why she was asking such a question. Dick replied in a disgruntled voice that they were worried that she wouldn't be able to, adding that she had fallen behind while running and hadn't been able to jump over the abyss. She said that if their curses worked, she wouldn't have to dodge at all. Dick shouted angrily that their specialties were not curses, and she was the catarologist in the group, but she didn't want to back down and started shouting something back. That's how the Second Shinobi World War began. At the same time, Cammy tearfully asked the group to calm down. However, the next moment there was a loud slap of someone's palm on the table, which made even Malin freeze, not to mention Cammy, who was looking out from behind her. Simon, who was the culprit of the noise, said in a loud and confident voice that since summoning creatures was not forbidden, he could use them to distract the Cyclops, while Cammy and Dick could use their strengths to support him. Then turning to Cammy, he asked what she could do with her hematology, to which she hesitantly raised her hand and said that since she specialized in attacks that changed quickly, she could provide support with curses. After listening to the girl, Simon turned to Dick, who was lying on the desk, asking what he could offer. He sighed and replied the same as Cammy, adding that he would be practicing fatigue all week. At the end of the lesson, Professor Jane informed everyone that for the next lesson they had to prepare a 10-minute presentation of their strategy against the Cyclops, adding that it was necessary to specify the role of each member as well as the types of black magic used. When she was finished, she announced that that was the end of it. Walking out of the classroom and behind Simon, Dick thought to himself that Simon, despite his poor knowledge of necromancy, sometimes said really clever things, and that he could deal with any problems and also guide the members of his team. He was actually a little jealous of him now, and now he understood why he had the first special clearance. When he caught up with Simon and gave him a friendly hug on the shoulder, Dick smiled happily and said that he'd heard they were serving steak in the mess hall today. Simon said cheerfully that they had to hurry then, and Cammy replied excitedly that she would go with them, while Maylene, who was trailing behind, didn't know what to do since she hadn't been invited. Immediately after lunch, Malin came to the next class and resented them for leaving her alone, saying it was their fault she didn't get steak. To which Dick replied that he should have gone with them, for he had already said it was a special dish. Hearing Dick's reply, Malin said irritably that they were annoying. At the same time a voice invited everyone to sit down. After asking what class it was, Jamie raised her hand and said that it was a class. When he heard this he replied that it was the first time they were seeing each other. Then the speaker, who appeared to be an elderly teacher wearing a beret and scarf and shaking hands, introduced himself as Lon Strauss, adding that he would be teaching toxicology. Then with a slight hesitation he said that they were starting the class, ordering the students to open the first page of their textbooks. Then in a monotonous voice he began to explain what toxicology was, and other things, and after a while most of the students in the class were asleep, and even Simon, who had always listened enthusiastically to the lectures, could hardly keep himself awake. Dick had fallen asleep with his head buried in his desk. The professor had sort of finished with the theory, which everyone found very boring. He said it was time to try making a simple potion. Hearing his words, half of the sleeping students woke up and sleepily tried to understand what was going on. When the professor started to say what was needed to make the potion, he suddenly started coughing up blood. The assistant who ran into the classroom excitedly turned to the old man and said that he should rest, as he had probably overworked himself, adding that they would take care of the laboratory. The old man continued to cough up blood in a weak voice and started to say that he had to teach, but the assistant who was taking him away calmed him down, saying that they would manage. Finally agreeing, he breathed heavily and headed out of the classroom. The assistant sighed heavily and opened a large ash textbook with a turquoise eye on it. After that, she noticed the boy, who leaned on her arm peacefully sleeping. The next moment, she launched a thick textbook at his head, which reached its target. Simon, who was near the book, also froze in confusion. She then shouted in a loud voice, telling everyone to wake up. The sleepy students pulled their faces away from their desks and started to look around fearfully. However, the assistant did not stop, angrily asking how they dared to be so rude to the professor. Then she started to reprimand the students and in a furious voice started to ask how they could just fall asleep in the middle of the lesson, adding how they could call themselves students after that. The students hearing her words felt a little guilty and listened silently. After that, she said in a cold voice that they should not dare to forget their manners anymore. To which those guilty voices replied in agreement. When she had finished instructing the unenlightened on the path of righteousness, the girl introduced herself as Professor Land's assistant, Francesco Belmont, and then informed them that today she would be teaching them instead of the professor. While the assistants were handing out the necessary supplies for the lab robotics, the assistant announced that today they would be making low-grade poison potions, adding that they could put aside their textbooks for the time being. While Simon and Dick looked at the potion brewing tools with interest, the girl said that the key to making a low-grade potion was controlling the quantity or order of the ingredients. The point was the dexterity of carrying out the process. She then said that the first step was to light a fire under the cauldron and wait for the water to boil before pouring in the salamander and barley powders. Raising her hand, one of the girls asked how much powder was to be poured in. Professor Land's assistant replied that the volume was not important, adding that they should pour as much as they thought necessary. At the same time, in one of the cauldrons with boiling liquid, some unknown alchemist poured a powder that formed a green vapor when it interacted with the liquid. As it turned out, the alchemist was Simon, who smelled the vapor and noted with disgust that it stank. Dick, who had stopped by to look at it, was surprised to see that it had turned green, unlike his. At the same time, seeing that most of the students had completed the first part, the professor's assistant, who was replacing him, asked for a show of hands for those who had blue smoke rising from the cauldron. Dick, who had blue smoke, raised his hand. Then the girl said that they would make a poisoning potion with neuroparalytic effect. Then she asked the rest of the students who had green smoke, and immediately after her words several hands went up in the class, including Simon's. She told the students who had green smoke from the cauldron that they would be making a poisoning potion that gave them headaches and hallucinations, as well as the ability to deal with other mages and necromancers in battle. Looking at the smoke that became more intense, Simon was surprised. Since the textbooks didn't talk about such a thing, and he didn't know about such a flexible training method either. Then the girl told all the students who had green smoke to hang their jackets on the chairs, as the assistants would give out the necessary ingredients. Then leaning over the cauldron of one of the girls she told everyone to listen to her very carefully, then pointing to the cauldron she said that they had to remove a thin layer of oil that should have been there. This layer of oil was plant-based oxides that were impairing the potion's effectiveness, which was why they had to get rid of them. After that, one had to keep stirring the potion with the ladle until the liquid thickened. In addition, the result could depend on the degree of heat, so one had to be sure to keep an eye on the fire. One of the girls raised her hand and timidly asked if it was normal for her potion to turn yellow. To which the assistant replied that she had done a fine job, as yellow hues characterized the best quality poison potions. Then adding that such a potion could even be sold in Rochester. Hearing this, the girl was very happy, while her friends also started to praise her. Suddenly another girl raised her hand and said that her potion had changed color from blue to green. She turned around and said that it was probably just ingredients from the bottom of the cauldron that had changed the potion's effect, and then advised her to add more ingredients. At the same time, Dick turned to Simon, who had been watching the assistant, saying that he now understood why Professor Lon was still afloat in Kizen, and it was because of a very talented assistant. Simon couldn't agree more. Seeing his friend's overly intense gaze, Dick couldn't help but ask his friend if something was wrong, to which he replied that everything was fine. His gaze rested on a small bottle containing a green potion. After a while, Dick turned to Simon and showed him the bottle of blue potion he had made, and asked if it was worth taking it with him to the fight with the Cyclops, adding that he thought it was worth trying everything. The man said with a smile that he had thought about it too. Hearing their conversation, Mei Lin, holding a bottle of high-grade yellow potion, said that it was a bad idea and their plan wouldn't work, since low-grade potions wouldn't have any effect on medium-sized or larger monsters, and the Cyclops was medium-sized, so there was no way this plan could work. Dick leaned back in his chair and muttered frustratedly that it was unfortunate that he'd been unlucky this time. Simon, on the other hand, was concentrating on the book. After a while, he came across a page about a potion that contained Lihart mushrooms. And they were the same ones his mom sometimes made for him. Turning to Mei Lin, he held out the book and pointed to the page and asked her what she thought of the potion. Looking at the page Simon pointed to, the girl, glowing with joy, asked Simon in surprise what page it was on, to which he replied that it was on 254. Cammy and Dick looked at the book in surprise, not realizing what was going on. After looking at what was in the book, Cammy was also fascinated by what she saw. After looking at it, Mei Lin turned to the guys and said that it could work. Hearing that, they were delighted. Pointing her finger at the potion information, Mei Lin explained that this potion briefly paralyzed tendons and also contracted muscles. It was called Nervier, and it was a neuroparalytic that weakened muscles. It also said that it worked on small and harmful monsters from the 3rd level up, Mei Lin exclaimed happily after reading the information. Cammy also added in a cheerful voice that if they used it against the Cyclops, they could at least slow it down. Hearing this, Dick added cheerfully that it would be a good idea to add such an effect to fatigue spells, while Simon continued to read the information about the potion, saying that for the effect to work they had to make the target drink it or apply it to a wound, adding that they could wound the Cyclops and then throw the potion bottle at it. Gathering around Simon, who was holding the book, the rest of the guys were enthusiastically answering that he was right, as well as talking about how it could be used. When they had finished discussing how to use the potion, they decided to make it first, choosing the lab as there were cauldrons available. However, the problem was the ingredients. They could find the bulk of it at the academy, but Lihart mushrooms, blood slime and silk vines were a problem. However, Dick reported that it wasn't a problem, saying that if he went through Rochester, he could get all the ingredients today. Simon asked in surprise if that was really possible. He gave him a thumbs up and said it was no problem, suggesting that Simon go together. Simon pointed his finger at the mushrooms and said that he could help him find them, as he had seen many of them in his homeland and in Kizen. Hearing this, Dick asked him where he could find them at the academy. He replied that he had seen them in the Forbidden Forest. This information shocked absolutely everyone, even Mei Lin sat wide-eyed with her mouth open in surprise. Dick waved his hands, asking how he knew about him, then realizing that it was not important, he asked Simon if he was going to go to the Forbidden Forest. Seeing his friend's concern, he tried to reassure him that it was all right, and it wouldn't take him long to go, and those mushrooms were growing right next to the entrance. But since going into the Forbidden Forest could get them all punished, Simon volunteered to do it alone, saying he wanted to do something for the group. Hearing this, Dick was touched by the words of his friend, who for their sake was going to go alone to such a dangerous place, promising to pick mushrooms by tomorrow. Despite his confidence, Malin raised her voice and said that it was too dangerous as there were many dangerous monsters that could injure him, which could affect the group performance. Cammy, who had been waiting for her chance to prove herself, raised her hand and loudly announced that she would go with Simon. Malin turned to the girl and said that she had already told her that it was dangerous, but she replied that that was why Simon couldn't go alone, as 2 heads were better than 1. Simon, on the other hand, also agreed to the suggestion, adding that they would leave as soon as they were in danger. They concluded that Dick was mining blood slimes and silk vines. Malin looking for basic ingredients in Kizen. While Simon, along with Cammy, went mushroom hunting in the Forbidden Forest. Finished with the division of duties, Simon said that they should meet together with the ingredients in the lab in the evening. To which the others unanimously agreed. At the same time, an unfamiliar hooded man was watching team number 7 sitting in the classroom. Although his face was hidden by a shadow, his sly smile clearly indicated his not-so-good intentions. As soon as the lesson was over, the students immediately headed for the exit of the classroom. Hector, who was walking in the crowd of students, was approached by a hooded stranger who greeted him. When he heard the unfamiliar voice, he turned around to look at the speaker. The hooded man said that he had some useful information and asked Hector if he wanted to hear it. Later that night at the horse barn, Dick showed Simon and Cammy a secret passage that only a few people knew about that they could use to get to the Forbidden Forest safely and unnoticed. Dick warned them that the guards near the Forbidden Forest had just finished their patrol, so they had some time until they returned, but they could never be 100% sure of safety, so they had to be quick. His friends were very grateful for his concern. They told him that they would see him later and also advised him to be careful. And they left without delay. As they were walking through the night forest, which was filled with the sounds of night creatures, Simon noticed that Cammy looked excited and asked her why. She happily replied that she loved walking at night. Simon knew why, she was a vampire and it was probably one of her characteristics. As they continued walking through the forest, Simon asked her why she liked nighttime so much, and she replied that for her, nights were soft and comfortable. Simon thought that he did not think so at all. Cammy looked up at Simon with her big purple eyes and began to apologize modestly for saying this so late, but she was very grateful to him for helping her in the magic combat class last time. Back then, she just couldn't climb the huge hippos on her own and looked around for help, but everyone ignored her, so she convinced herself that Kizen was a very competitive school and that this was bound to happen to her. But then Simon showed up and he was the only one who asked her if she needed help. And he offered to help her get up. Confused, Simon, realizing where the conversation was going, began to make excuses that he just did what he had to do. But Cammy sharply closed the distance between them and told him to his face that what he was doing was what he had to do and made him incredible. In an attempt to move the conversation away from such a dangerous topic, he quickly raised a lantern over his head and told Cammy to look up there because he had found something. What a wonderful coincidence it was for him that they had just reached the place where Lehark mushrooms grew. He told her that it was indeed them and there were quite a few of them. Simon added that since they didn't know exactly how many they needed, they should take them all. A few minutes later, they had a basket full of mushrooms, and Simon put it on the ground to rest for a while and noted that they had done it faster than he thought. Cammy took advantage of this short pause and asked Simon what brought him to Kizen. He didn't quite know what to say. And not knowing where to start, he started at a distance. He believed that the initial reason was that his parents sent him here, both of whom were very concerned about Simon and believed that he would make it. But as soon as he started studying, he had his own thoughts and goals. And as soon as he learned about summonology, which he was extremely fascinated by, he seriously started to want to become a necromancer. Simon asked Cammy what about her. Why is she here in Kizen? But before he could finish his question, he heard rustling in distant voices, approaching quite quickly as if they were looking for someone. Simon quickly grabbed Cammy's hand and pulled her to hide. A minute later, the friends were hiding behind a large rock and heard the voices of the guards talking to each other. They had found a place where they had been picking mushrooms and were going to focus their search in that area. They were guards from Kizen, they had dogs and flashlights and were vigilantly searching this part of the forest as if they knew someone must be here. Simon didn't understand what brought the guards here. Cammy was shaking with fear, but she found the strength to explain to him that the guards' job is to protect the area around the school and usually they watch the forest and hunt for monsters. If the guards catch them, they won't be able to get off the hook, even during the period of student protection. Simon emphasized that Dick said that there shouldn't be any patrols here anytime soon, but their presence here meant some kind of emergency and it wasn't a regular patrol. What kind of problem could there be in the Forbidden Forest? A frightened Cammy with tears in her eyes was panicking and starting to regret being here and asked Simon what they had done. Simon decided to calm her down and took her by the shoulders and told her to look at him and listen. They could get out of here. He had an idea and she just needed to trust him, and when he started running right behind him and asked if she could do it, she said yes. Simon, using the device Fayer had given him a few days ago, asked him if he could hear him, and Fayer, from his hiding place, said that yes, he could hear him and asked what was going on. Simon replied that he was in trouble and he was afraid that he would not be able to cope without the help of the battalion and he had to act. He had a plan to solve everything. After some time Cammy informed him, she had put all the nearest stones into his subspace, for which Simon thanked her and said that he had done everything he needed as well. He asked if she was ready and that they should use everything they could. Cammy agreed with that completely. Simon said, "Okay, then. Let's go." And his rat man jumped out of the bushes and ran towards the guards. The guards' dogs immediately started barking and the alarmed guards were about to split into two groups, one to catch up with the fugitive and the other to continue the search. Then another rat man ran by them and the commander of the guards immediately ordered them to chase him and capture him. At the same moment, Simon grabbed Cammy by the arm and shouted to run, and they ran as fast as they could. The dogs noticed their movement and perked their ears. And even when the other guards were busy with the skeletons, the dogs rushed at our friends. Simon advised Cammy to use hematology spells on these dogs and that anything would do. She said okay and started preparing the spell. From the magic circle she had prepared, pink fireballs flew at the dogs. They hit the dogs directly. They stopped and howled in pain and now could not continue the chase. However, several guards came to the noise with other dogs and were going to set them on them again. The guards saw that they were going to run further into the forest and were going to shoot at them with their bows. Within moments, a barrage of arrows began to fly at the fugitives, who were trying to hide between the trees. Cammy panicked again, asking what they should do now that they were being shot at with real arrows, but Simon reassured her that they had seen their uniforms. And since they are Kizen servants, they aren't going to shoot them. The guards shouted at them to stop. Simon clenched his fist and told them that only when they stopped. He was about to open his subspace filled with stones. In a moment, in the place where Simon was running and where the guards were now, a subspace opened from which stones flew out. The guards did not understand what it was and told each other to be careful, because it could be some kind of magic, and they were forced to stop and let the fugitives go. Our friends managed to run to the edge of the abyss, and behind them they could hear the voices of the guards shouting to each other that they couldn't have gotten far and they needed to be found. Simon asked Cammy if she remembered the jumping technique they had learned in the magic combat class and if she could use it now. She shook her head and told him that no, she couldn't, and that he should jump first. And she would be fine anyway. She was exhausted and drenched in sweat, but she was smiling nonetheless. She told him that even if she was caught she would never tell them about him. Simon was amazed at her self-sacrifice and was not about to give up and leave her there. He quickly picked her up, apologized, and told her to hold on to him. Before she could respond, he accelerated toward the edge of the cliff, and Cammy tried to tell him to wait, but it was too late. Simon pushed off the ground with a thud. In a moment he was flying high above the abyss. With the wind whistling, they almost reached the other side together. Simon skillfully landed on the ground without falling. The frightened Cammy just held on to him. Putting her on her own feet, he asked her if she was okay. But he didn't hear an answer, she just sat there staring dazedly into the space in front of her. Suddenly, she seemed to come to her senses and tears began to appear in her eyes. Simon did not understand what was happening to her, so he asked her what was wrong and if she was hurt. Cammy tearfully began to explain that she thought she was going to be caught. Simon wondered how she could have decided to stay there in such a frightened state and be caught. Cammy burst into tears and thanked Simon through her tears for saving her. Simon told her that he was just doing what a friend would do. And it looks like the guards have finally lost track of them, so they should go back to the school because they have a long journey ahead of them to get there. He asked her if she would be able to walk and she nodded and told him that she was fine. Wiping away her tears, she smiled and said again that she was very grateful to him. Together they took a detour through the unfamiliar terrain to avoid running into the guards again, with the bright moon lighting their way. However, this didn't make the forest filled with strange sounds any less eerie, and even Cammy wasn't so excited about the long night walk anymore, so she asked Simon if they were lost. He replied that he thought they were headed in the right direction. Suddenly, Cammy stopped when she heard something strange, a strange sound coming from them. She told Simon that she was hearing something strange, but he doubtfully replied that it might be owls or some other animals. Cammy confidently replied that it was definitely not owls, it was a human voice, and together they looked in the direction of the sound and even Simon began to distinguish some strange words. He agreed with Cammy and decided to check it out. He started to wade through the bushes that were rustling around him going towards that voice. Suddenly, Cammy flinched and Simon froze as well. Cammy was the first to come to her senses and started tugging on Simon's sleeve, telling him that they had to get as far away from here as possible. In front of them was an unknown person in a white robe, who was reading a prayer. Cammy began to shake from the words of that prayer and covered her ears with her hands to avoid hearing it. Simon did not understand what was happening to her. He held the girl so she wouldn't fall, and he wondered what that man was doing here. They were in Kizen on the island of Roke, so how was this possible? The priest continued to pray to his almighty mother goddess, Devi, in front of the repulsive animal skulls and statue. Simon realized that it was none other than one of the priests offering a blood sacrifice to his goddess. The priest finished his prayer and for a second there was silence in the forest. And the next moment, the priest looked Simon straight in the eye, which froze him. Simon finally recovered and in desperation shouted to Cammy to run. But a blue barrier appeared right in front of them, cutting off their escape route. The barrier kicked up a pile of dust and small stones that scattered across the clearing, and as soon as it cleared, Simon realized what was wrong with this priest and why he might be here. He was using darkness for his spells. So this was not just a priest who had secretly managed to sneak onto the island. He was a traitor to Kizen, who now summoned a bunch of crosses and chains around him, rattling in the air, surrounded by swirls of mana, and ready to fight. Cammy noticed this as well and told him in fright that this priest was using both holiness and darkness. Simon told her that he thought he was a traitor and that the powers he was using were usually on opposite sides of the battlefield. Then he took her hand and added that he was not sure what was happening, but he was sure of one thing. And again, trying to run away, he shouted to her that if he caught them, he would definitely kill them, and the crosses and chains flew after them. One of the crosses whistled past Cammy and cut her leg, and the wounded girl screamed in pain. But this was only the beginning, and the chains were already catching up with them. Simon only managed to shout to dodge them. One of the chains cut Simon's shoulder, but it seems that he was not their target. Because the next moment the chains wrapped around Cammy's legs and threw her to the ground. Simon did not have time to do anything but shout at her to hold on. The chains were dragging the unfortunate girl toward the priest with a clang, and she could not resist, only asked Simon for help. The traitor made a movement with his hand and clenched it into a fist, and the chain followed his movements and lifted the girl high up like a feather. And with a loud thud, he sealed her to the tree, tying her with chains. The priest was in full control of his chains, which were his weapon. Having dismantled and immobilized Cammy, he then took on Simon, trying to get him as well. However, he turned out to be much more agile than his friend and didn't get caught easily. But he couldn't keep dodging and running away, and one of the chains flew right at him. Simon was going to get something from his subspace, and where he was a moment ago, everything was exploding from the impacts. He pulled out a sword from his subspace and was going to use it to deflect one of the attacks. But after the first strike against the Cross of Darkness, the sword broke. It was a bit unexpected for Simon, and his hand trembled from the impact and the chains whistled towards him. However, Simon managed to recover at the last moment and dodge the blow. The chains hit a tree behind him as he landed on the ground. He grabbed what was left of his sword and began to fill it with darkness. And then he threw it with all his might at the enemy, hoping to at least see his face as he dodged, but Simon's attack was no surprise to him. He simply turned his head slightly to the side to dodge it, but the priest was surprised to see the tree that the sword fragment had hit explode. They stood there looking at each other for a second, assessing each other's options. After a moment of hesitation, the priest created dozens of dark crosses around him with a creak and a stomp. But then it turned out that this was only the beginning, and in a moment Simon was surrounded by a weapon of apocalyptic proportions, thousands of crosses that were ready to fly at Simon at any moment. Now he knew for sure that he could not cope with this, so he decided to urgently call for help. He took up his communication device. The priest did not understand what was happening and why this crazy student was smiling. The next second there was a powerful blow that demolished half of the clearing. Simon came to the rescue of Fair, who was now laughing ominously while holding his sword, which was smoking after the blow. Fair, with his sinister smile, asked Simon if he was okay. Simon replied that he was, but when the dust cleared it was clear that the priest was alive and almost unharmed. Somehow he had managed to conjure a shield that protected him from the blow. Fair told Simon to retreat and stay away, because this battle was too difficult for him right now and he would definitely not be able to handle it. Simon completely agreed with him. Having dealt with this, Fair laughed ominously again, saying that it had been a long time since he last fought in battle. And once again he struck at the priest's shield, each blow was like the explosion of a small bomb. Meanwhile, Simon was able to free Cammy from the chains and tried to bring her to consciousness, asking if she was okay. Although she was still unconscious, Simon was glad that she had not been seriously injured. Simon lifted her onto his back and carried her away from the battlefield. Through the device, he asked Fair how the situation was on the battlefield. He told him that it would not be easy, as this person was outrageously strong in terms of mastery of darkness. He was roughly at the level of a professor. He also added that his strength would be the same if it were not for the seal. He laughingly launched another attack on the priest. Simon turned to Fair and said that he had an idea and wanted to ask him to follow his orders. Fair smiled to himself as this reminded him of something. So he replied that he understood, since Simon was Richard's son, he must have some smart ideas. And Fair struck another blow so hard that the whole forest shook, and even Simon, who had already moved far enough away, felt its power. Simon was happy because his plan worked. The Kizen guards heard this noise and vibration and were now running to where the priest was. He even heard them shouting to chase someone and let the dogs down. He told Fair not to pursue the priest, to leave everything to the guards and to return to him. Simon knew that the priest would escape, but it didn't matter, as long as he survived and saved his friend. Fair quickly turned to him and told him that he was proud of the way Simon had used the guards. Simon looked at his battalion commander and noticed that he was a little wrinkled and asked him if he was okay. He replied that he shouldn't worry about him, he could take a lot more, but this girl seemed to need more urgent help than him. And then he picked them both up and told Simon not to worry because he would help them. Simon thought he was going to heal her wounds and said he didn't know he could heal wounds. Fair put Simon on his shoulder and took Camus in his hand and said he could not heal wounds, but they were going to get out of this place right now. Simon started to ask how he was going to do it, when Fair ran away with such speed that Simon could not finish his question and almost fell off him. Now Simon was helplessly crying out for help as Fair ran, laughing and telling him to hold on tight. Only a cloud of dust remained behind them. After a few minutes, Fair brought them to the edge of the forest and set them on the ground and told them that they should go on their own. Since he smells some kind of fishy odor, it seems it might be a similar long-range detection spell and so he definitely can't go any further. Simon still hasn't recovered from such a quick trip, but he sincerely thanked him for saving their lives. And Fayer left saying that he had just signed a contract with him and was not going to lose him so quickly and wished him to be careful for the rest of his life. Now Simon had to decide what to do with Cammy. He could take her all the way to the school, but what to do with the girl and how to take care of her without harming her or himself. If he just went to the hospital, the doctors would definitely have questions about how she got those wounds, and he would get into even more trouble with her if he told them what happened today. And that priest could see their faces, and given that he was a traitor and Simon could not see his face, he was also a danger to them and could be waiting for them somewhere on their way back to finish the job. Simon came to the conclusion that Cammy had to be treated by someone he could trust, there was no other way. So he carried her to his dormitory, specifically to the dormitory manager he had once helped deal with the arrogant nobles. He knocked on her door and she told him to come in. With a creak, he opened the door and she calmly began to ask him what brought him here at such a late hour. But when she saw who he was and in what condition he came to her, she screamed in shock, "Simon!" Simon stood in front of her, covered in mud and with cuts and bruises, holding the girl in his arms and asking her for help. She was shocked by his appearance and asked him what happened, and then she saw the girl and said that girls were not allowed to enter the boys' dormitory. Simon told her that he knew all this, but that it was urgent. Then she noticed that the girl was injured and advised him to take her to the hospital, not here. Simon told her that he simply could not do that. He began to explain that it was complicated and he couldn't tell her the details, but he asked her to help them anyway. The hostel manager looked at him without understanding and could only ask, "What?" Simon bowed to her and asked her again to treat the girl here, she just didn't know what to say. In the end, she exhaled nervously and thought that she would regret her soft heart one day. Then she pointed Simon to a bed with a screen and told him to put the girl there so she could treat her first. He was very grateful for her help in such a difficult time. She closed herself behind the screen and began to treat the girl's wounds, asking Simon what could have happened in the world to cause such wounds. Most of her wounds were light scratches and bruises, but one cut had been left by something sharp and large. She advised him that if he has fights with other students, then he should resolve it during the student defense period. And there is only one thing she learned from this job. Students do whatever it takes to survive here, no matter how ugly it is, no matter how much it might hurt them or others around them. Simon clenched his fist and told her that they were not fighting. And he was sorry that he couldn't tell her everything that had happened. The dormitory supervisor finished treating the girl's wounds, left her to rest on the bed, and came out from behind the screen, heading to Simon. She told him that if he didn't want to tell her, she wouldn't ask him again. That was fine, she would not ask him about it again. But she still needed to examine his wounds, so she asked him to roll up his sleeves. She opened her bag of medicines and instruments and told him that she wasn't sure what had happened, but that health was the most important thing and he had to stay healthy if he wanted to have a chance of survival in Kizen. She put on some bandages and asked him if he understood what she was telling him, and of course he did. She added that the other girl was also not badly injured, so she would ask a staff member from the girls' dormitory whom she trusted to take her to her room. Simon told her that he was very grateful for her help. And he will never forget what she did for them. The girl told him that it was okay and she was always happy to help him and then added that he should also go back to his room. Simon was about to go to his room and before closing the door behind him, he apologized again for disturbing her so late at night. When he left, the dormitory manager thought that she wondered how long he would stay here. He was a rare type of student that you don't see often at Kizen. Simon went to his room and immediately told Dick that he was back, who happily jumped out of bed. He immediately started hugging him as if he had seen him for the last time and was very surprised that he was okay, asking what was wrong with Cammy. Simon advised him to calm down and told him that they were both fine. Despite the fact that they were chased by guards and then got lost, everything ended well. But enough about them. How is he okay, and where is Malin? Dick started sniffling and crying that the guards were chasing him too and he barely got away from them, although usually they don't go around at this hour, but for some reason they did today. And he also talked to Malin and warned her about the guards, and she advised him to postpone the potion making until tomorrow. Simon noticed that she probably had to go to bed late because of them. Dick told him that at first she seemed a little hurt and annoyed, but eventually she became more understanding once she heard about the guards. Simon put his stained school uniform in the closet, and Dick asked him if Cammy had also gone back to her dorm, to which Simon replied in the affirmative. He added that they should go to bed after such a busy day. Dick said he would turn off the light when Simon was already sitting on his bed, exhausted. But despite his tiredness, Simon could not sleep, his thoughts would not leave him. It was not the first time he had seen someone praying that evening, because his mother is a priest, but Cammy was probably shocked. And the last thought he had before he fell asleep was that he would have to talk to Cammy separately tomorrow. The next morning when he met her, she was just beaming with happiness and wishing him good morning. He was surprised by this mood, because he expected a completely different mood from her, but he asked her if she was okay just in case. She flapped her wings excitedly and replied that yes, she was fine. She added with enthusiasm that yesterday was like a dream. Simon didn't quite believe her, so he asked her again, was it a dream? She happily began to tell him that yesterday they had a night walk, mushroom picking, chasing, some scary things happened too, and it was exactly the type of dream she had in mind. But Simon didn't share her enthusiasm for nightmares, so he told her that it was a good dream at first, but then it started to turn into a nightmare. Maybe that was why the night before didn't feel real. He wondered to himself if she really believed that everything that happened last night was a dream because she was too shocked, and that was not a bad thing if it helped her cope with the shock. Simon took her by the shoulder and told her to listen to him. He told her that the priest ran away as soon as he saw the guards and he probably saw his face, but she probably didn't. Then he asked her not to tell the rest of her team what happened last night and just to act normal. And he would definitely find out who the priest was. Suddenly, Cammy got too close to his face and made him feel uncomfortable and assured him that it was all about the two of them and she wanted to be helpful as well. She started to yell that he couldn't just leave her out of everything, which made Simon feel uncomfortable. He stammered and began to convince her that it was fine to help, but that he didn't have anything so urgent right now and as soon as he needed something, he would ask for her help when the time came. Cammy was very excited and told him to rely on her and she would do everything, to which he replied awkwardly that he would try his best. Then Simon went to his first class, catarology, and he was extremely exhausted and sleepy. So he barely listened to Professor Bahil, who told them that last time too many students relied on the corrective device to cast the exhaustion curse, so this class they would practice a simpler curse. Today's curse is a transfer curse, which uses a formula to direct darkness at a targeted object and is the basis for all other curses. The goal of today's lesson will be to create a magic circle in the air without a corrective device. The plants in front of the students had a tendency to bloom when they were filled with darkness, so they needed to use a transfer curse to make the plant bloom. And as soon as Simon started the task, he was completely unsuccessful, and the runic letter would jump out of the circle and hit him on the head. The whole circle would lose its strength and spread like water or just explode in his hands, covering him with clots of darkness. Dick watched his friend's attempts with sympathy and asked if he was okay. Simon told him that he was not. He had to defeat the Cyclops next week, and he was not ready for that and now he was exhausted. Suddenly, Professor Bahil came up behind him, put his hand on his shoulder, and asked him how he was doing. "Are you handling it all right?" Simon was surprised that the professor had come up to him and another thought popped into his head that he reminded him of someone.